Welcome to Behind the Code, presented by Atomic Build. I am Amit, and with me today is Abhi, the CEO of AdZeta. Really happy to have you here, Abhi. Thanks for joining us. Instead of giving your intro, I'd love to hear an intro about yourself and your company.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me, Amit. Yes, so I am Abhi Agnihotri. I'm the CEO of AdZeta. Right now, I've been in growth marketing for the last sort of 10 years or so. I worked in enterprise growth marketing roles. I started from the agency side, pivoted to enterprise growth marketing. Then I launched my own performance marketing agency. And back in 2023, So during this time, I've managed close to $150 million in ad spend, and I kept on seeing the same problems that restrict the quality of customers that these brands acquire. And that's what the premise of the conversation is going to be. So excited to be here.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a very topical introduction. Describe your company really well and what you do. And you mentioned you were managing about 150 million under paid acquisition and financial services and other categories. I was thinking about that and I was wondering, like, what did you learn in that experience that a lot of marketers in-house might never get to see?
So during my time running, these large scale paid media acquisition campaigns, the most standout thing that came out to me is that these ad platforms are remarkably good at optimizing what you give them to. So Meta, Google, TikTok, these are I would add AppLovin to that piece as well. These are one of the most sophisticated pieces of machine learning ever assembled by mankind. And they are really good at doing what they do. With a massive asterisk, it's dependent and it's a direct function of what you feed them as a value. If you feed them standard purchase level events, they will go and find out those people who will, create that purchase. We will maybe offer optimize for a sign up, these sort of shallow level events, quote unquote. The problem is the input, right? So if you are feeding these shallow events, if you go and find out, but it will not look into the long-term picture and the long-term profitability. Like that's what I saw all the time repeatedly across several years. And I also see a massive over-reliance on creative. And right now it's almost getting commoditized to the fact that it's becoming a detriment to performance because every brand with the use of AI can spin up multiple creatives. They can push them in the platform. The platforms will respond to that. It will obviously be like a vicious flywheel where more creatives get thrown. It increases CPMs and CPCs. And again, it just erodes the quality and just, it's having a detrimental impact. And that's why I hear from all the brands that they're having scalable problems. And that's a function of what, and I learned that during my time as well, but now it's getting more aggravated. And then lastly, I would say the measurement piece where the brands are mostly reliant on ROAS as opposed to contribution margin or bottom line performance, because ROAS can inflate and actually be quite deceptive in terms of what they want you to see. So those are the three main learnings. And of course, since in this 1 decade, I was sitting at almost the midpoint of this was when the sort of the zero interest rate policy was, where people were just throwing money at the problem. It was easy to scale and people were just like getting in that sort of wrong habit. Now with the non-ZERP era, people have to be a bit more cognizant. Investors require more, attention when it comes to growth numbers and unit economics, and those numbers are now coming back to bite them. So those wrong habits have curtailed way too long, but we do see a trend whereby people are shifting towards profitability and like long-term growth as opposed to just grow at all costs.
Got it. So you mentioned one thing, like shallow versus maybe like a more deep cycle, and how would you describe the two differences? And when you're meeting with or have a customer coming on board, how do you break that cycle? So let's say they've been doing that now for the better part of ZERP to today, let's say, for example. How do you kind of define to them to break out of that shallow cycle and moving into what you would say is a better investment in this channel?
So what we do is traditionally we ask for what outcome they want to achieve and reverse engineer from that rather than trying to impose ourselves on like whatever we want them to do or we position AdZeta as. So a common way to look about this is like, are the cohorts of customers that you're acquiring right now making sense for you in the long term? Is long-term profitability a metric for you? And lastly, do you have sufficient variance in your customer cohort to actually benefit from what we do? These three questions are the three pillars in which the initial conversations go. And if the answers to either two of them is even like two of them out of the three is yes, then that's a good way for us to kind of go and like proceed with some sort of a follow-up. If they're only looking at sort of the next sale and the next sale and the next sale and they don't have enough variance in the customer portfolio, then we need to be cognizant of our resources as well as theirs. Because in this era where trust is so scarce, like you need to be upfront with the brands, what you can deliver and what you cannot. And we do that in the very first conversations where we do this analysis and tell them that with your data, with your data sort of distribution in your customers, this is what we can do, this is what we cannot do, so that we have realistic sort of expectations and we move from there.
Great. So do your potential clients ever disqualify themselves based on those like those three structured questions that you have from the onset?
So before going to any meetings, we already know a lot
Mm,
about their customer composition based on publicly available resources, their business model.
right.
Like you can't hide that, right? So it's usually a question of like the data distribution. So once they're able to share the data and there's not enough evidence that it's going to be a major lift, then we are able to be like we are very sort of transparent in that piece, and we tell them that this is not the right fit right now, and maybe you needed more variance, and it's not. And then it's a question for the brand whether they want to progress or not. But usually when we talk to brands, more often than not, like 85-90% of the time, we know exactly what problems they're facing, exactly what their business model is. And if it's not the case, like we are reluctant from our side, even taking the conversations and taking the calls,
Right.
and we tell them that this is not the right fit for what the stage you're in. So it's a two-way street, and the brands appreciate that.
Right. Yeah, that makes so there's quite a bit of pre-work before a conversation. And like because you've been in the space pre-AI era and now AI era, do you have like a research methodology you're using through an agent or maybe like an LLM that helps you get to this place? And you don't have to share the
Yeah.
proprietary methodology, but I'd love to hear like how you spun that up
So
if you're using one.
So we are using internally in our SaaS tool in some of the work, which obviously can be agentified. A lot of the stuff cannot be agentified right now because of the stakes, the high stakes, and like the latency and a few other things. So we're very cognizant in terms of not just using AI for the sake of it. We are bootstrapped, so we have no investor pressure, and I am
Right.
the one taking the decisions based on whether it actually adds tangible value. A lot of people, not just in our space, but just in general, they're just using it because of outside pressure, a lot of other things. For me, it's the outcome and then the reverse engineer where the AI can actually solve that purpose or not. For us, we are using in certain cases where we can like actually churn out the mundane processes and pre-qualification, yes. But in the case where when you think about sensitive client information, right? When you're talking about customer data, a lot of that can be, of course, we can pseudonymize a lot of that stuff from agents and LLMs. But a lot of the stuff cannot be agentified right now. So we are really particular about like which pieces the agents are touching and which they aren't. So there's a conscious flow there to put it that way.
Right. So like you would say when you say like mundane, I guess it's like routine tasks that you would do through a search or a scrape or something like that. That's okay. But then
Yeah.
maybe deeper level analysis,
Handling
someone from your
customer
team.
data.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So handling
Okay.
customer data, handling customer orders at that level of scale, at that level of scrutiny, we are compliant with SOC 2, and like we take privacy very seriously. So a
Right.
lot of these things right now are to that stage where we use AI blindly for these. And same goes for agents as well, because it's agents are just built on top of these foundation models. So we take that very seriously, and all of those are like, in a tight cloud ecosystem. But we do like once that data piece and the custom piece is taken away, a lot of the modeling piece can be agentified. Of course, machine learning has been around for 30 years, so we don't rely on a lot of machine learning and less AI, but a lot of that stuff can be agentified in terms of, the normalization of the data and a lot of the other stuff, which
Got it. Yeah, I think that's a very good approach, especially when it comes to protecting your customers' data and like any proprietary information flowing through your system. One thing, just like when we were chatting before and doing some just research on what you do, you kind of predicted that signal would be an overused term, but maybe not well understood in ad tech. Can you just kind of go deeper on that and explain what you meant?
yeah, it's one of my favorite topics to discuss. At the same point, it edges a little at the surface of being a pet peeve because everyone talks about signal, and it's theoretically, or like, if you think about, they have a rough notion when they think about signal, or when people think about signal, it's some form of data coming in and data going out, roughly
Right.
speaking, on a very high level. But it can mean a lot of things, and all of them have different orders of magnitude in terms of the performance they drive, the lift they drive, and it's fine for vendors because they can sell it. But as a buyer, if I was a buyer of a consumer brand, it would be a nightmare for me to distinguish how they are fundamentally different from one another. So it can be broadly classified into 5 types of signals. You can talk about creative signals, which are the most overused right now, and people are talking about creative signals and like Andromeda and Meta. and a whole host of things where how you talk about that retrieval stage of ad ranking, or not ranking, but a retrieval stage of the ad ecosystem. Then you think about the measurement signal. So the measurement signals would be your typical MTA, MMM, incrementality, how you measure your performance based on backward looking criteria. So it's a reporting problem, a measurement problem. Then there's an attribution signal, which is how do you actually make sure that the offline to online, and maybe throw retail in the mix to some degree, that coincides with your media spend, and what portion of ad spend is actually driving that. So what's the attribution piece? So that's the attribution signal. Then you have the audience signal, which is the classic CDPs, which have been doing for 10 years. CDPs have been doing that for a good part of the last decade or so, where they build some sort of they take the first party data, they build some sort of a customer list, and you can pass that as an audience layer into the ad platforms, and then you can build lookalikes off of them based on those snippets or those sort of packaged or segments, right? That's what CDPs are doing. The last one is the bidding signal, which is how do you send a forward-looking value to the platform so that it can actually operate on that level where it looks into the future and like predicts which users are going to be the most valuable users. So the first four signals are all to some degree backward looking, and they provide some sort of, lift, which is like, I would say single to like low double digits. When you look at the bidding signal, when you're sending and improving the auction itself, we have seen up to 60% increase in ROAS, which is a magnitude which is very hard to, quantify, measure or match from when you look at other levels of, especially audience, because a lot of the vendors are working in that audience signal space, and that can be all very easily confused with the bidding stream, which is fundamentally different. In audiences, you don't need to take care of latency. You don't need to take care of a whole host of things which come with the bidding stream. So that's why the risk reward obviously is much more. The technical complexity is more. But those are the five main categories.
And what so I mean, that's a much broader way to describe signal. And you mentioned that it's a pet peeve of yours when, I guess, described incorrectly or maybe surface level pushed out there. Do you notice that that is a description on the customer side or other competitors in your field? Like, where does that come from?
I'm looking at more from if I was in the shoes of my buyer, because that's how I like to think about problems. Like if I was the buyer of AdZeta myself, what would I be thinking? And if I would be like, wow, this is crazy. Like, what sort of signal are you doing? And this happens to us on a recurring basis in our customer call, in our sales calls, right? We're having calls with prospects. It takes a few iterations to get to tell them what exactly we do. Some of them don't even know it's possible, let alone knowing that, this space exists. So this is how early the space itself is. You need to tell them this can actually be possible. And that's a problem statement, because you're almost trying to create awareness and educate the industry, but also be empathetic that they just don't understand a lot of the times. So it comes with some sort of a learning curve. Of course, vendors will do the best they can. We are vendors, so of course but at the same point, transparency in this day and age is super key. And we do not want to operate in any of the other four categories. And we are very explicit about that we are not doing any other stages. So if you are looking at signals from that lens, measurement, attribution, we are not the right fit for you. And we tell them upfront, because it's a lot of the vendors out there will obviously say, okay, sure, we can make ways around. And that's a classic sort of agency mentality, because agencies are so broad that if someone comes to them for paid media and someone asks them graphic design or whatever, sure, we do this in-house as well. So it's a classic that, but for us, we need to be laser focused on this problem statement, because it's very technically complicated as is. And we don't want to be, spreading ourselves too thin by, just increasing the basket size, so to speak.
No, I think that's a good approach, because you're right. A lot of agencies do the jack of all trades, master of none, but it sounds like you're narrowing in on one set of mastery. When you mentioned that customers sometimes don't believe it's possible, do they share their source of disbelief, or is it something that you've just gathered in your decade of experience what the likely source is?
Likely source is because most of the times I think that if this was the case, then why Meta and Google are not doing this? And they almost think of us, it's almost like a shift where they think that we are trying to outbid Meta, but it's far from the truth. We're not trying to outbid anyone. No one can outbid Meta or Google in what they're doing, but in what they do in terms of the bidding algorithms, there's a space in which you can supply this forward-looking signal. And we actually augment that. And Meta and Google are one of our biggest advocates, because if advertisers are spending on their platform and getting much more returns, they spend more money on the platform. So it's a win-win for everyone in that ecosystem, all three, the brand, the Meta, and us included. So everyone wins in that sort of three-way space. But it's mainly a question of confusion where they think that this might be a question of you're coming instead of Meta, but that's not the truth. Like we are actually complementing their bidding stack by supplying a signal layer, and then that does its magic, which is it's fantastic at doing anyways.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I can see why there's a assumption there, like how you describe it. I
That's
can
one of
see
the
how someone
questions. Like
leaps to that. Yeah,
that's one of the questions that they ask, like why can't Meta and Google do this themselves? So
right,
the answer to that is Meta and Google are fantastic at providing you those propensity logics because they operate on that 7-day conversion window. And whatever signals they receive in that 7-day conversion window can be great proxies for some shallow level events, but they often are not really good indicators of long-term customer lifetime value
right,
because a lot of these indicators will be maturing after 7 days. So anything you send to the platform after 7 days is just a blind spot. Platforms
right.
have already learned and they've gone towards that sort of user, which is the easiest to acquire because that's the signal you're giving them. You're telling them to acquire users on checkout value, for example. If you have a checkout process or you want it to optimize towards that AOV, then platforms will optimize towards that and it will go and find that user at the minimum cost possible. And that's what it does brilliantly, by the way. But what it does not do is it does not take into account whether that one checkout value is a one-time buyer or that checkout value is a 12-month subscriber. So
Right.
the value can vary from $60 to $600, but at the time of the checkout, it's only $60. So the forward-looking indicator is not possible unless you actually feed in predictions. So it's
Right.
great at what it does, but again, it goes back to the fact that what input you're feeding it.
So yeah, I guess it's the bad in, bad out kind of thing that could unfold. And you mentioned prediction. So like, I think you have a clear distinction between a prediction and a signal. Can you just describe the difference, like how you interpret those two different words in your space?
So they're two fundamental. So you're absolutely spot on. That prediction and signals are fundamentally different things because you can have a perfectly trained model, and when you predict something, the accuracy of the model is determined on like the root mean squared error or like the May and the makes, which are the standard statistical metrics. And what that does is it tells you what you're predicting, what's the discrepancy in that, right? And so a model can be the most accurate piece, or it can be the most accurate thing ever assembled, and you can have a very robust model, but it can have no impact whatsoever on the auction mechanics because of the way you're sending it. So if you are sending predictive values, first of all, you cannot send them raw. You cannot send them raw because they're probabilistic in nature. And these systems by design are only designed for deterministic outcomes, which are not probabilistic, which have already happened, does not come with a probability. They come with a timestamp. And when you send them without any sort of calibration or without taking care of the auction mechanics, it can be considered noise to them if you're sending them very tightly clustered or if you're sending them like very widely clustered. We're going into technical details, but like long story short, there are two pillars here and they don't talk interchangeably and they're two separate ends of the spectrum where model effectiveness is not correlated or it's not a direct function of what the signal design might look like. So the effectiveness of the auction is a different thing and the prediction itself is a different thing. And they both need to be talked closely together and that's where the calibration comes in.
Got it. So there you've seen in your experience very strong technical models, but they perform operationally weak when deployed. Like okay, got it. So
Exactly.
so is that one of the core lifts that you have to undergo when someone comes onto your platform?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
That's the most
Okay.
technically, those two pieces, the calibration and the orchestration, understanding the auction mechanics are the two biggest pieces of why this is so complex and why in-house teams more often not get this wrong
Right.
as well. Because
Right.
everyone over-indexes on your model accuracy. All the time spent by data science and machine learning teams goes in how accurate we can make the model, not on how that downstream effect goes, because these are
Right.
two different things. You can invest all your time in that, but you can have a 95% accurate model. Fantastic. Does it talk to the platform in which it has an impact on your campaigns? If yes, brilliant. If not, then all that model and all that compute and manpower has gone for nothing. Because you're not
Right.
building a model for reporting, you're building a model for bidding. And these are two fundamentally different things. Because when
Right.
you think about LTV, everyone thinks about LTV like 95% of the conversations which talk about LTV on a very loose sense, they all talk about historical LTV. They all look at backward-looking LTV, which is used for reporting, which can be used for any sort of forecasting, that sort of thing. It has no correlation with the forward-looking nature of how you're optimizing bids and customer acquisition. And that's where the PLTV space comes in, and LTV and PLTV are distinct categories where they need to be treated very drastically differently.
And do your clients get that like instinctively, or is it something still a lot of education and you're pouring a lot of
It's
time? Yeah.
it's education, but once you tell them, they get it right away. It's a very quick sort of aha sort of a moment where okay, this makes sense, and it's not necessarily a bad thing because the way everything is structured around LTV, it's if you go. Unless you're actually looking at it from a very deep level, you would know that it's all backward looking and it only solves a certain select cohort of purposes.
Right.
And unless you go into the deep ends of it and solve the purpose, and again, it leads back to what I was saying. You have to lead back from the outcome. If your outcome is actually improving your customer quality and acquisition quality and improving the cohorts of customer you acquire, you cannot use backward-looking LTV as your only metric because it will not impact the bidding decisions. So
Right.
again, lead with the outcome and reverse engineer from there and then see the best tool out there. And then you will be in a better position. That's what the brands we work with are usually are.
I'm not a buyer in your space, but that was a convincing string of sentences to to go in and use your product and work with you. So I can see why you're like I assume your aha moments with customers happen quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually in that first conversation, a lot of these sort
Right.
of quote unquote misconceptions, for lack of a better word, they come into play. And but again, we sort of thrive in that ecosystem because it's a challenge we accept. It comes with a risk because we have potentially longer sales cycle, longer decision cycles.
Right.
But I would rather be in that position than being and working at the cutting edge of stuff rather than being multiple years late or decades late for that matter and working in something which
Yeah.
is very mundane, right? Because this category is super new. Only a handful of players exist on the planet. And that's for a reason because you need a lot of moving pieces to get this right.
Right. So that's a great way to go to my next question, which is just about your team. Like what kind of team do you need to build a company like this? Because you're sitting across growth, machine learning, infrastructure, marketing. Like there's so many disciplines you're touching. How do you just like look at that when you're building out your team?
So three main pillars stand out. One is data engineering. So someone with a very strong infrastructure background who has knowledge about the architectural decisions, what plumbing decisions to make, what's the best thing to use for a certain use case based on cloud environments, all that sort of stuff. Then you look at production quality machine learning experience, where people have actually built production models, not just theoretical models, but actually in quality at scale. And then lastly, people who understand ad platform mechanics as well, because that's super critical. When it comes to the ad platform mechanics, I've personally seen myself overseeing a lot of this stuff because I come from growth marketing, but I've overseen that data science component. So I can talk from a product lens for both of these pieces, the data science and the ad platform mechanics. But we need specialists in these roles, and we do have specialists in these roles. So for production quality ML, we have a stats PhD from UC Berkeley. He actually worked in this stuff at Google in terms of building these pipelines, and he was a data scientist there. So he knows exactly how to build these systems. And then for infra piece as well, we have someone who actually works in that sort of the server-side CAPI, plumbing, infra piece, and connects the dots when it comes to these two. So these three are critical. Most teams would have two out of the three. And as much as I hate to say it, it's not enough because you need to
Right.
have all three right to get this at least at a bare minimum. If you have people who understand the architecture really, really well, then you can have people using AI to kind of be as disruptive as possible. They can move at a velocity of 10x. But if the architecture and the decision making is not right, then AI won't help you. So
Right.
that's one thing which I look for hiring is like how much they can spin on their how much they can think on their own from a critical thinking first principles architectural mindset, because then AI can be a multiplier, a force multiplier. But if not, AI will only be garbage in, garbage out, like you mentioned earlier. So you need to have that sound reasoning, and these three pillars are the ones which we use for hiring.
And do you create like a environment where you can measure technical judgment through your hiring process? Is it like possible to do that, or is it just based on their like historical work or public work that they posted?
So great question. There's no meta style into coding interviews because
Okay,
right
fair
now
enough.
the dynamic has changed, and how would you know if the person is not using AI for that piece either?
Yeah.
And to be fair though, it's not the right judgment either because I would not want them to use AI in a way, if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
would encourage them, right? So if I was judging them just on the basis of that logic only, it would be unfair because I'm snatching some of the best tools out there from them. However, what we do search for and look for is how much they can think like a product owner, think like an architectural decision maker, and how much they can actually, not just work themselves, but inspire a team. And those are some
Right.
sort of first principles. Pre-AI and post-AI, that has changed for me because previously I used to hire data scientists who had very strong vertical exposure. into what they were working on. So if I need
Uh-huh.
to work for direct to consumer or any sort of vertical specifically, I will hire for that particular vertical experience. If they
Right.
have it, great. They check the box in there. Now it's actually flipped. I need people who have more horizontal experience, and they can actually cascade out to different verticals and apply the same level of critical mindset and first principle thinking across the verticals and not just be limited to one vertical. And that can happen if you think like a product owner, if you have good architecture understanding, and then of course with the use of AI tools, now you're like a 10x team. So that's one of
Right.
the things. Our team is able to move at a velocity of a 40% team, if I'm being kind,
Uh,
which is massive.
yeah,
So
yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So, and that must help, especially being bootstrapped. You're keeping your team quite lean and you're investing in like all the
just
right elements to move fast with like judgment layer, which is what everyone's citing now is the most important thing, right? Over all AI models is the actual judgment to deploy them. And on that, like this is just, I guess, for a broader set of people out there, just founders outside of ad tech, what do you think they can learn between like building an intelligent model and then actually having it act in the real world?
yeah, I mean, that activation is the product for us. So I keep on thinking about that. And I was really particular about when we were building AdZeta that it does not just live in a dashboard. So
Right.
what I like to say, and again, this is me being biased, but I feel like data used to be a moat 10 years ago. Data is not a moat anymore. I mean, in a sense, sure, we're looking at different lenses. I mean, sure, if you're looking at foundational models, data is still the moat. The quality, the cleanliness of data is all super important. I'm just saying from a machine learning and data science standpoint. And
Uh,
from a brand's perspective as well, like, having more data is not the moat. How you use that data and how you activate them is what you need to be good at. And when you think of, other founders and not just in general, like, data scientists and people who are in this space, almost think about it from an activation lens, like how this data can actually quantify and move to business outcomes. Because a lot of the data scientists out there, they're fantastic in their own technical right, but they do not have enough of a sort of a business hat on or a product hat on. That how will this tie back into some sort of a tangible lift that we can provide? That can be ROAS, that can be contribution margin, that can be anything, any number that needs to
yeah.
tie back, and then you reverse engineer from there and see how you can actually go and build that system which allows that to you to kind of mimic that lift. So having that sort of product hat on is one of the most important things, because now with the roles converging, the PM roles, the technical PM roles, the coding roles, they all are converging into one thing. And the
Uh-huh.
best thing you can do right now is learn to think like a product owner. And
Right.
once you do that, I think you'll be in a much better a much better position rather, and you'll be able to add significant value to any ecosystem. Because now when people talk about lean teams, you can be like a 3-person team of a product coder, and then obviously with AI, you can be like a force multiplier. So I think that's what I would say is the most important thing at this. At least that's what we look for in terms of hiring, and that's what we
Yeah.
think is arguably one of the most resonant theme with people who are hiring at good levels and also succeeding in their roles.
If someone doesn't have that skill just yet, but they're technically sound in one particular area, would you say like your model of customer outcome working backwards is like a quick way for them to accelerate their thinking as a product owner? Would
Yeah,
you say like that's yeah, okay.
it's a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cheat
Yeah,
code.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course, because I think that's the easy way. And I always tell my technical team, especially the ones who are super technical, that you need to start with the why. Like,
Mm,
why are you doing or why are you taking a certain decision at this particular time, and what value does it add? And once you start with that, your decisions here in the technical space will keep on changing, because then you're
right.
thinking not just from that, like in silo, but you're thinking and contextualizing that from a business outcome perspective. And once you do that over passage of time, it's more reps. It takes a bit more manual effort in the beginning, but it will come naturally afterwards. And once
Yeah.
that happens, you are a much stronger engineer in this day and age, because you already are imbibing that product mindset in you subconsciously. And before you know it, it's right there. So that's why the reverse thinking really works.
Uh-huh.
And starting with the why is my second piece to add to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a very sound methodology for people converging from, if you're a PM now going into the technical side, or if you're an engineer going into the other side. I mean, ultimately, everyone is converging towards a business outcome internally and externally for your clients. So I think you have it right, and you're building a lean team around that. I'm going to ask you just some rapid questions, like outside of your business, just more about you and how you approach your day to day. The first one I wanted to ask you was like, what domains capture your attention outside of ad tech?
Healthcare, there's a lot of incentive happening in healthcare right now, which I feel can be disrupted with the use of AI. I'm looking at a lot of research right now happening in cancer research and these sort of areas where AI can massively disrupt that areas. Of course, it comes with massive compliance issues, but that's one thing which I think can be massively beneficial, not just to space itself, but humanity in general. And this should be used as a multiplier in that space where we are talking about dramatically different outcomes, not just, and that's where I think the paradigm of AI almost being used as like some sort of a negative connotation when it comes to data centers and all that stuff, it can spin
Uh-huh.
a very positive effect. And that's, I think I personally am very interested in that piece and looking forward to that.
So that's something that you track, like,
I
adjacent
don't
to what your
track
day-to-day.
no, I
Yeah.
don't track that often. I would love to
Yeah.
have more time to track it.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
But yeah, there's lots happening in our space itself. But like that's one thing which I'll be once I have some more time, I'll be more interested in like hearing and like listening to podcasts and stuff. Of course, in terms of AI, I always look at the cutting edge stuff when it comes to foundational models, what new models are coming in. Now it's to talk about harnesses, right? I mean, how
Uh-huh.
you actually have harnesses being enabled properly in order to make sure that your model does not drift and it does not hallucinate, because that's one of the biggest concerns right now. So that category is becoming more and more prevalent now, which was not the case, but it should have been the case much earlier. So
Yeah.
that's like these few things are very interesting to me.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, those are it's sometimes it's hard to drift away from your core work, and you naturally, I think, go into places that contribute to what you're doing day to day, so that makes a lot of sense. That actually leads me to my my next question, which is, what actually takes you out of founder mode where you can switch your mind off? Like, is
I
there an
Yeah,
oh,
I
go
like
ahead.
to read and play tennis, two opposite ends of the spectrum, but like,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
is more sedentary, one is more active. But like working out, playing tennis, just any high intensity stuff is like a great way to kind of, keep your endorphins flowing, keep your, energy right up there. I pay a lot of importance on good sleep as well, because that's super
Uh,
critical for productivity. And I can feel that if I've not slept well. So these things
right.
are super critical, and these are non-negotiables for me. I can have a long day at work, but I'll still work out at whatever time of the night. So
Good
these
for
are
you.
things which are really important, and these are for every founder. I highly recommend, because they can have a massive difference in what you do during the day job.
Yeah. No, I agree. And as a tennis player, I have to ask you and throw in a book recommendation. Have you read The Inner Game of Tennis?
No,
Okay, you got to add it to your list. I think you'll
great,
enjoy it. Yeah, yeah, it's a
perfect.
fantastic one about just mindset while playing sports and running businesses. I'll send you a link after.
There's a podcast
Yeah,
from Djokovic, and his new documentary is coming. There was Nadal's
yeah.
documentary earlier, so there's a lot of good content coming. But I haven't read the book. I'll definitely read that.
Okay, I'll share the link with you. It's a really good one. I think you'll enjoy it. And then lastly, is there a founder or a business leader that you borrow from or emulate? And like, what is something that you take from them that really resonates with you in your day to day?
There's a lot of things which I like about Ryan Chesty in the way
Okay.
he operates his business and the way he thinks about problems and the way he thinks about hiring, recruiting in general. I think he's the one who, in my opinion, is like I can relate the most to. More
Hmm.
empathetic, more personable, and also the fact that more unfiltered, right? A lot of these founders out there are like, super filtered and super like, particular, like, in terms of oversharing. He is very open in that piece, and he has that
Right.
sort of product lens. He comes from that background. He has like culture as well, like industrial engineering and stuff. So I really resonate with like a lot of the things that he talks about in his podcast and the way he thinks about problems, the way he shares stuff. I'm
Hmm.
more in the lens of oversharing than undersharing, because transparency right now is like, it's critical and it's key. So I resonate the most with the way he talks and the way he presents himself.
Yeah, yeah. He was, and he's been heavily scrutinized in different areas, but he's always taken it on and explained thoroughly why he took a position. So, I can see why that like, especially also in your space, you're building a small team. It must be a very transparent and high, like, candor must be valued by you inside your small team. So that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it for today. I mean, this was great. I really appreciated your time and hearing your insights. I learned a lot, like, genuinely. I'm not an expert by no means in the space, so it was really nice to hear you just very explain so many things in a 30-minute cycle. So I appreciate that.